Hello and welcome to Holistic Circle Spiritual Conversation. My name is Philipp Kobald. We're reaching out to people who are passionate about spreading light, love, and joy and found a way to integrate it into their daily lives. I am blessed to have here with me today Catherine Corona from the wonderful Colorado. Hello, Kathy, again.
Hi there, Phil. Glad to be with you. It's a beautiful day in Colorado. Yes.
Perfect. So let's hope for the God of internet and let's see if we can get through this conversation. I'd like to start my podcast with a small introduction, a small bio. Where have you studied? I know you've studied. What is your journey? How it all came about? And if you can say a few words, I'd be lovely.
Right. So I think spirit came to meet me despite myself through many different spiritual teachers when I was very young. And I lived on a ranch up in the mountains outside of Boulder, Colorado. And there was a big ranch house, a lot of acres, and I lived in a little studio above the barn, no running water, tiny little place. And in the big ranch house was some people lived there that studied with a Sufi teacher named Rashad Field. Rashad was actually from Europe. I think he was from England, if I remember correctly, or he lived in England. He's passed away now, but his students were there. He came to visit, and I got to meet him, and he would just talk to me. I was studying hard science at the university, biology, physics, chemistry, and then here's the spiritual teacher who I didn't know what that was. So I just chatted with him, and I think he got a really big kick out of me. And he would just talk to me, and I got introduced to, as Sufis practice, the sound current, the spiritual heart, and they moved out, and some people that followed Native American traditions, specifically Lakota, moved in, and a medicine man called Archie Fire Lame Deer came and did ceremonies. His father was John Fire Lame Deer, who wrote Lame Deer's Seeker of Visions. It's kind of a famous book about Lakota ceremonies. It's a beautiful book. And they would invite me, and I got to go to sweat lodges, pipe ceremonies, and other ceremonies. But at the time, I just went because there was a feast, and I was very interested in going for the meal. But I was so deeply, even though it was all in Lakota, none of it was in English, I didn't know what they were saying, but I caught the spirit, the sanctity, and how that their reverence. In Lakota, they say, they end every prayer with, "We are all related. We are all we are all relatives." It can be translated to, "We are all relatives." And when I was with them, I even though I didn't speak the language, I caught the spirit of the sacredness of the way they saw how we were all related. Not just humans related, but related to the trees, related to the animals, related to the earth, that we are all family, we are all related. And I got that despite myself, and it opened me up beyond science. And then I moved down to Denver. Somehow, I don't remember how I met a Hindu teacher from India and learned a mantra meditation.
When we decided on this podcast, we talked about magnetism and how some people are magically drawn to spiritual, either to friends or to teachers or ways. So it's so fascinating to hear that you never seeked out. You didn't look at the Google to find where's the next workshop. Here, you just have an openness inside of you, and clearly also a curiosity maybe coming from the science, who knows where it came from, but you clearly have exactly this, what I've seen over and over during my travels, that some people are just open to spirituality and they will find, if they want or not, the moments, the inspiration, they it will just find itself. And I can see that you will have more. magnetism stories to share with us about your life. And I would also, before we go into more detail about the magic things that happened to you, I would like to get your take on the certain openness. Why do some people maybe have it more than others? Or is there anything that comes to your mind on that subject?
Well, I was very, very young when I was 5 when I chose a spiritual path. And I did that consciously as a 5-year-old. I didn't know what it was, but I understood at 5. I turned 5 in April, and I knew I was going to school in August, and I didn't really wanna go to school at all. I just didn't wanna leave home, and I started asking the question at that age, what is life all about? What am I supposed to do out there in the world away from home? And at that time, I was talking to God, and I said, "You know, what am I meant to do?" And I did it every day, every day. This was really important to me. If I was gonna be in life, I had to be in this other part of life away from family and home and something I didn't know, the uncertainty of going to school, then what was I meant to do out there? And having that moment, or the many moments throughout the summer talking to God, talking to I called it the voice. Um, then I I chose 2 things. I wanted to be the best person I could be. I didn't wanna squander my life. I realized that a life was a gift. Somehow I knew that at 5 years old. It's like, I have this thing called a life, and I wanna make the best of it. I didn't know how I would do that, but part of what I said to myself as a 5-year-old in a 5-year-old vocabulary was, "I just wanna be the best I can be." So that's the openness that I made that decision.
So,
And
so
then,
if I
you know, they
So if I translate this correctly, you think that just some people have a natural, like born with a certain search or a certain openness or curiosity towards the spiritual world. You think this is something like given by birth?
I think that every life is a spiritual life, and every
Sure.
path is a spiritual path, whether it's conscious or not. And if a person chooses to make it conscious, then, the famous saying, "When the student's ready, the teacher will come." And we don't even necessarily need teachers. So I don't mean to say because my path, I was introduced to all these teachers. One thing I learned from all these teachers is that the real teacher, there's an inner teacher, there's an inner master. So all the teachers that happened to come my way led me to the bigger inner consciousness that is the true teacher.
Because it's a question that has been bugging me for years and years. Why there are simple some people. I agree with you that everybody, of course, we're all equal, and everybody has a spiritual element inside of themselves. And every person in one time or the other will ask the big questions: where I'm from, where I'm going. There, clearly in alliance with you, but still, the question is there for me: why there's simply some of us who are so much more into spirituality, obviously are more open. Is it given? Is it life? Or is there's something else? This is something that's been on my mind for many years, why some of us seem to have the calling and so many others don't.
Well, I don't think the calling needs to necessarily be conscious because the spirit resides in every one of us. And a greater consciousness, a higher, we have different levels of consciousness. We have this physical body, we have our physical consciousness, we have mental consciousness, emotional level of consciousness, spiritual level of consciousness or soul. And every life is meant, is it preordained? I think is what you're asking. Is this preordained for some people to make this path a conscious path?
And
I think
therefore,
probably.
is there a certain responsibility with it, right? If you hear the calling, if you know that you have the calling, even at a very young age, what about your responsibility towards that calling and to the world that you're there to give, you're there to bring light. So are you living up to this possibility on that calling? So these are the questions, and I jumped right into it because I know from your background and from the things I read on you that I mean, if I can't talk to you about it, with whom can I talk?
Well, I was called in. The other thing that happened when I was 5 was when I was asking, "What am I meant to do here?" The other part of that was, well, then you're also meant to contribute. You're meant to be of service. And so that was a conscious choice as well to make my life however it would unfold. Sometimes that's in the moment, sometimes that's the broader of doing volunteer work or talking to you or talking to other people or working with people to contribute in some way, to be of service. That's the highest life, it's the highest calling. Now, that doesn't necessarily what I have learned over the years is that doesn't necessarily mean I have to do anything or a person has to do anything because there's the paradox is that what I've learned is when you come into alignment, attunement with your soul and your spirit, just holding in that divine presence is enough and anchoring
Exactly.
that is enough.
If why is this also important to me is because I think we all, whoever I've been talking over the last couple of years, we see a great shift with all that social media and all that the speed of the world and the pace and the loss of community. I just had a pre-recording meeting a couple of hours ago with a person who is very much into nutrition and healthy life. And then we start talking about how people stopped eating together, coming together as a family, making rituals out of all of it. How life is falling into millions of small snippets of a couple of 30 seconds, and then there is the calling, and then there is a spiritual rhythm that clearly does not work in 30 seconds. So that's why,
We're
also knowing that you started a program, so there's a lot of things that come together in my mind talking to you, how we're going to move forward from here to keep integrating a spiritual life also for our children and so on in a world that is destined to make 30 seconds the ultimate time for everything.
I had a vision one time. I was driving and I was asking spirit, why is there so much disease and challenges and accidents and in this world, why isn't this heaven? And it was very I heard this voice, same voice as when I was young, very young, and it said to me, "This is not heaven. Heaven is heaven. This is the place for challenges. This is the place for hurdles. This is the place to learn. This is the place to grow. This is the place to take the seductions of the world and overcome them." So I don't look at what's happening, what you can look at as negative in the world. I look at those things as strengthenings. It doesn't mean we don't work to make things better, to raise the vibration of the planet, to help people to assist in our own lives and jump over our hurdles and our challenges and our doubts and our hesitations. But it does mean that all these things that come are for us to overcome. I mean, I'm not gonna get caught up in what the world is offering me if it doesn't suit me, if it's not joyful and loving. I'm not gonna get caught up in that. That's my choice. That's every single person's choice. So if life has gotten really fast and social media is in 30-minute sound bites, I don't need to listen to that. We all have our responsibility. Why would I go that direction? I wouldn't. Just like I wouldn't go into the direction of some of the, nonsense things, getting into drugs, getting into out, that's each person's choice.
Well, after those experiences you had in Colorado early on, I think you didn't need drugs anymore. I think you're already you were open enough, I think, as it is.
Well, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? That, the practice of spirit, the practice of soul, aligning, attuning to what is a higher consciousness, whatever words you want to use, brings an experience of transcendence, in my
Yeah.
experience. Practicing meditation, an experience of transcendence and a radiance, and a harmony and a magic. That's where life gives us its
And horror
beauty.
sometimes.
And what?
Sometimes what?
And
Horror sometimes. That when you
horror.
start opening, when you start connecting, especially I work a lot with meditation beginners. I do a lot. I love it actually. It become my new big passion. I love beginner groups more than anything. And when you start getting in contact, when the first steps, they release not only pleasure and not only the divine and the good, there's also a lot of nightmares that come up. And so the beginning, the beginning is a lot of things to be cleaned up. And that's why I'm very much interested in this specific work, because it's a good work. It's an important work.
I never had that experience. So when I entered a spiritual path and started meditation practice and chanting and other spiritual practices, I never had horror. Never. I I will say that there's a saying that goes, "It takes great courage to see the face of God because first you have to see your own face." I will
Absolutely.
say I traveled looking at my flaws came up, just like if you clean out a messy closet, right? You get to
Right.
see all the mess as you're cleaning it out,
Right.
but it was never horror. It was never sad. It was never
Yeah.
hard even.
I have to here be more precise. Uh, yes, the spirit is always loving. Of course it is. Otherwise, it would be purposeless what we do. But if you don't love yourself, if you are not in a certain cleanness and awareness with yourself, it's not always that you can perceive something given from love as something lovable. When you don't think you're deserving, when there's so many dark spots in you, even if something is trying to do kind to you or the spirit is giving its warmth and love, a lot of people misinterpret what they get. I don't know if that makes any kind of sense to you, what I'm saying here.
Um, I don't have this experience, and I've never had this experience that you're bringing up. And it's not that there are not challenges. I think this path has great challenges. Because as I said, to see the face of God, you have to see your own face first and go through it. And there's things there that I might want to lift up, but I've never looked at it as darkness, ever.
For me personally, also not. But in my work, I've come across it a couple of times, and I think it's interesting to talk about it and to observe it. And especially, I've been using your wonderful platform these days. The last couple of days, I had the pleasure of you giving me a chance to use it for a couple of days, and it's lovely chanting and lovely spiritual messages. And can you tell me a little bit more? of where you're going with this. What is the purpose? Who is the clientele? I would very much like to know how you see it implemented. I'm very curious about that.
Well, I wanted to just though mention along this line, I worked with women in jail for a couple years, bringing a lot of this work to women in jail. Some of these people, and I also worked with the police department I was at, a lot of crises, trauma, suicide, death, assaults. I've worked in some of the hardest people that have had horrible things done to them as children. Mostly the women in jail had horrible things happen to them as children. I still brought the loving part of spirit. And we worked through this. We talked about these things that happened to them. Throwaway kids, kids with drug addict parents that were thrown out on the street, this kind of thing. I mean, really, really tough stuff, really tough stuff. And stuff that would make you want to cry, just make you want to cry. I still always brought the loving of spirit in there because that was the only way they could confront these things. Not through the shadow work that people talk about, not through the darkness, but bringing in the loving there. Because if you don't, working with those people that have had such trouble, such incredibly difficult things, they couldn't handle looking at it straight on without the loving. Could not. There were a lot of tears in that jail module. A lot of tears, a lot of release, and it was always beautiful. And then we always filled the light back up in the places where the trauma was. And that transformation is like a baptism, and it's beautiful. And once those things come back, the light, see the light of day, see the light of spirit, those folks can move on to making different choices. Some of them did, some of them didn't. I lost one of my people to drugs that got released out of the jail. That was heartbreaking for me. We talked about all these deep things, released so much stuff for her. She was 18, so she was in adult jail, but she went right back into the drugs and died within a few months of overdose. But most of the people um, actually shifted and didn't come back because I see the same people over and over again. I worked with them for a couple years and they didn't come back. And actually, the program in the jail changed as well. So it was pretty awesome. But that's the way I look at that. And I lost track of your question. I wanted to go back to that because that is my experience working with people that have had some of the hardest things you can imagine.
Yeah. The, my question was the purpose of your program that you created. The who is it for? I'm very curious because I've been using it for a couple of days, and I'm very interested for who you made it or what's the story behind. I would have loved to hear more.
People were asking me about meditating, and I thought to myself, or will you meditate with me? Will you teach me how to meditate? And I thought to myself, I think they're not really asking for a meditation program. Or a meditation practice. I think they're asking for an alignment, an attunement, a connection with spirit. So meditation being just one part of that. And there are many spiritual practices that you can use, not just meditation, to align with your soul and your spirit, your soul being that higher consciousness, the eternal self, the divine spark of God. So I really thought about that for over a year. What can I do? What in all my background can I pull out to assist people in making that connection and building up a spiritual practice? And I think everybody may has a spiritual practice, whether you define it that way or not. It might be walking with your dog. It might be spending some time with a child. It might be quiet time. It might be in a forest, prayers, reading scriptures, but making it a little more of a routine and a consistent routine just really starts to open up a greater relationship, a greater understanding, a greater knowledge of yourself, of your true self, of reality, of your spirit. And so I started to develop these 5 spiritual practices: an invocation, meaning an invitation to your higher self, to your soul, to your spirit; a teaching from one of the great spiritual masters that I curated, um, so a quote, and then I do an affirmation from that quote. So to help guide your mind and emotions in the directions you wanna go, and then a meditation. Um, oh, and a chant using one of the ancient Sanskrit, um, mantras like Hu and I Hu. I think I used the Ma, and then, a meditation with some stillness, some quiet just to be with yourself, but it's a guided meditation as well. And so that's the program, and it's 5 to 7 minutes. It's a subscription program. You can find it at soulandspirit.net, and hopefully in the program notes if you feel like putting that, Phil. And that was the program to help people just start to cultivate, nourish this part of themselves. So it's been just a
First
delight
of
and a
all,
pleasure to be on your podcast. The work you're doing to bring conversations about spirituality to the world, to Europe. I just thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege, uh, and just light and blessings to all your listeners, your
well, then
viewers.
thank you so much.
Namaste.